it being Father's Day and all, I thought we'd do a Father's Day kind of koan and appreciate all the many lineage holders that have brought us here and somehow passed along here that gets us here today. So here's a Father's Day koan for you. Feng Shui taught in the hall of the government offices in Yingzhou, saying, when the ancestor's mind seal makes an impression on you, it's like the working of an iron ox. When the mind seal is lifted, it continues working. But if the seal remains, its working is ruined. With the mind seal and without the mind seal can both be right, only if the seal neither goes away nor remains. You heard that right. And the ancestor's mind seal makes an impression on you. It's like the working of an iron ox, which the iron ox was this giant beast of metal that was at the bottom of the Yellow River in China to regulate its flow. When the mind seal is lifted, it continues working. But if the seal remains, its working is ruined. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. See some faces we haven't seen in a while, which is really nice. And sometimes a dangerous thing to be going into session around here. We have David Weinstein wrote to me this morning and said how much he wanted to be here because he feels like with John not feeling so well, it's just nice to be together. He said he had all intentions of being here, but his wife got into a fender bender. And she's leaving for Japan after retreat, so he's going to be with her. But he said to please let him know. And somehow there's disturbance when the great forces gather. And it's not in the realm of good or bad. You can just feel, we're, a couple years ago when we were heading into retreat, there was a massive COVID outbreak. We thought, are we going to make it in the gates? Are we going to have some rampant spread? And then all of a sudden, it's like that iron ox. Just as we're about to head in, things start to smooth out and we glide into the ancient gates. And this week has felt a little bit like that. So to give you just a little bit of a sense, last week where we left off was that nobody quite knew what was happening with John. He'd had some dizziness and some confusion, and some other mysterious symptoms that often go with being a John. But it was looking all right, but that kind of took a turn. And what that has ended up is that he's had a pretty serious staph infection. And the good news is it seems like with being able to find exactly what strain and get the right kind of antibiotics, things seem to be kind of moving toward a good spot that I think he's going to be able to go home tomorrow. The difficult side of that has been them not, for a while, not being able to know where the infection was coming from or what they could do to help. And just his body getting kind of depleted by not only the infection, but life in the hospital. If you've ever been, it's not an easy place to be, although God bless everybody who cares for people there. And yesterday it was looking like nobody knew what the heck was going on with him, but what it seems like is he got something called hospital delirium, which is a real thing. that when you're in, this is, in our universe, this is a true bardo state, when you can no longer tell if it's day or night, and you can no longer tell if people are men or women, and you can no longer tell if you're upside down or right side up. And there was all sorts of panic about, is he having a reaction? Is he having a stroke? Is he having, but there's a magical infectious disease doctor who's been helping him. And as it was told to me, as soon as he entered the room, he waved his hands and John's state started to change. And he said to him, he said to Allison, listen, hospital delirium, it's a real thing. And he sort of patted John and said, you need to sit up and watch some sports. And, and somehow just this man's presence and confidence with the territory just started to move the field. And by last night, he was eating a burger, and by this morning, he was asking for the croissant. And I got to talk to him this morning, which was really, really nice after a week of feeling him down. And he said, you know, I've been in the bardos, and it's a real thing. It's a real bardo. But it makes him very happy that we're sitting. It makes him very happy we're going into retreat. It makes him very happy that we have so many leaders and other people who are just willing to keep inhabiting the space that he, as the sort of father of this Zendo, has been throwing himself into for, these many decades. So that's the Wombat Report, as it was told to me. And as these things go, apparently one of his doctors is named Dr. Siddhartha, which you think, well, of course it is. Of course. He's John Tarrant, of course it is. And Dr. Siddhartha learned sometime during the week about John's Buddha story book, and so eventually shyly brought in a copy. And John, in one of his more lucid moments, dedicated it to him, and he promised to take it home and read it aloud to his family. And last night, as Allison was heading home to get some rest, she said she's been taking the outer corridor so she can have more time outside instead of in the halls before she gets to the car, which tells you about the appetite for more hospital. But she ran into Dr. Siddhartha on her way out. And apparently he's been tracking John's case very closely too, and was asking how he's doing. And he very shyly said he's been reading the book and he has a lot of questions for John. It's brought up questions, and also that his mother has been reading the book and is ahead of him and keeps asking him questions and keeps asking him if he's visited the Buddha's sacred sites in India. And he's been many times, but he keeps postponing visiting the sacred sites. So he said, next time I'm going to go. And so all that to say, I guess, there are no mistakes in how things go, and that we all have our own fates, and those fates are very intermingled. And I think one of the things about having a father, whether it's an actual father who helped get you here, or a spiritual father, or need not even be a male father, an aspect of someone or an aspect of your own mind that has to do with wisdom and guidance and developing a certain kind of fortitude and being potentiated, that fathers open the gates for us in some way. And whatever father we come to, there's a great painting that my partner did of, we have a young friend who's probably the most chaotic person I've ever met in my life. And his motto is to have as much fun as possible. That's his goal in life. and he just had a baby a couple years ago, and there's a great picture of him sitting with the baby on his knee, looking absolutely terrified. And the baby's sort of staring ahead, and he's kind of staring ahead. And my partner painted this, and she called it padre e filia, like the father and daughter. And you can see in his face both to be changed by having something in your care. And you know what that's like. It's a little different kind of care than mother care, but to have something that you feel compelled to guide and protect and teach about the world. And she painted them again now a couple years later. And you can tell already he's been changed just by the 2 years of having this on his shoulders and in his life. And the baby, if you have to have a starter baby, I think this one would be a tough one. Her name is World Conquering Child. That's the nickname for her when we saw her picture, because you can tell she's a force. But he loves her so much, even though you can tell sometimes he just has no idea what he's doing. And somehow we all come to what other kind of guiding forces we come to, with all their flaws and all their gifts and all their presence and all their overbearance and all their absence and all their everything. And there's some wonderful stories in our very direct lineage that I want to share with you a little bit. And a few poems too. But first, I think I want to tell you there's a little more to this koan. I want to just tell you because it's a humorous koan, this koan. So when the ancestor's mind seal makes an impression on you, and the mind seal, Zen is really not so much about, words are great, but it's something else. It's something deeper. And there's so many stories, and I'm sure you have your own, that when you meet a particular teacher, something touches you, it strikes you. And as you start to subject yourself to that teacher's field, it works on you, whether they say anything or not. And so when the ancestor's mind seal makes an impression on you, it's like the working of an iron ox, which is this big beast in the yellow river that directs the flows. When the mind seal is lifted, it continues working. But if the seal remains, its working is ruined. It's a very interesting point. When the mind seal, with the mind seal, without the mind seal, can both be right if the seal neither goes away nor remains. And so when Feng Shui says this and the elder Lu Pi steps forward, you can imagine this in a very parent-child sort of way and says, I have the workings of the iron ox. Please don't impress your seal on me. And which you imagine almost like a teenager, I don't press your seal on me. And Feng Shui says, I'm used to catching big fish and calming the seas, so I'm sorry to see just a frog hopping in the mud. And Lu Pi just stood there. He wasn't expecting that response. And Feng Shui roared, why don't you say something? Come on, you wanna go here? Why, let's have it. Lu Pi thought about it again, and so Feng Shui just hits him with his whisk and says, if you come back to the point of the koan, I'll look at it with you. It's a very interesting point too. Not looking to beat you, I'm looking to wake you up. So let's focus on the real thing here. And Lu Pi decided to open his mouth, and Feng Shui hits him again with his whisk. And the chief magistrate says, the Buddha's law and the king's law are the same. He says, "What have you seen?" Feng Shui says, "What have you seen makes you say that?" The chief magistrate says, "When it's time to decide, you have to decide. Otherwise, you invite chaos. You have to decide when it's time to decide. Otherwise, you invite chaos." And Feng Shui leaves. And so many interesting things about this koan. How, in a way, says it embodies the Zen paradox, which is no one can give you anything, and there's nothing you can get. And yet, something undeniably starts to work on you and potentiate you and open the capacities of your own mind. And if you try to cling to the teacher's seal, you try to cling to their dharma or their way or their consciousness, it doesn't help. All is lost. There's one commentary that says you shatter into 100 fragments. But at the same time, there's that mind-to-mind transmission that you feel, that you enter into this inheritance that's been passed along for countless generations. Yuan Wu, who wrote the Blue Cliff Record, said, "The historical Buddha is great, but this has been going on a lot longer than that." That's why we have that all Buddhas throughout space and time, we sing. That somehow all Buddhas throughout space and time have been passing along this mind seal, this way of being able to see and move as part of the universe. And you have it because you're here. You're part of it because you're here. Our task is really just to recognize it. And a good spiritual patriarch helps with that. And it's interesting how, as I said, there are a lot of different kinds of fathers. In the Greek tradition, one of the fathers is Saturn, and there's a prophecy that his children are going to best him, and so he eats all of them. Which, is a real thing in life. If you've seen Succession or you've seen many other things, you too may have been eaten by your father for a time. But one of the children sort of figures this out and whispers to Zeus, and so he's able to cut them out, and much to Saturn's chagrin. And Zeus goes on to become his own kind of towering force of a father, and is almost the father to just about everyone. And he has his pluses and minuses, He sleeps around a lot, which gets him in trouble and causes a lot of mischief for everyone, but he also provides innumerable wisdom and gifts. And, in our lineage, it's interesting, like Santoka, who was a wild poet and a monk, lost his mother very early and came home from school to help his father own a sake brewery. And in some ways, that sake was both the greatest gift and greatest curse of his life, because he loved it so very much that it helped inspire some of his greatest poetry, but also kind of made living a regular life and staying sober difficult. And Ikkyu, another wild monk, was a bastard son of the emperor. And the whole early part of his life was defined in terms of really his hatred for everything that his father was associated with. And in the end, through his practice and through his awakening, and in a sense, through the fathers he came to have, who were his teachers, he came to not only break through his resistance to authority and regime and all the things that he came to hate as a result of his karma with his father, but also had to come to terms with all the ways he was like his father, which was he became a powerful force, and he became a brothel loving creature, and he had in him the very thing that he thought that he couldn't bear in his father, and this is a real thing. Um, what who we come into the world with, who we come in contact with, has both fate and karmic aspects. And it's kind of an amazing thing in terms of the gates that appear, meaning that we do have a seal of the ancestors, whatever ancestors we come from, press in on us. And at the same time, we have to make our own way and not let that seal come to define us. And I was thinking about in my own family, I had a very large force of a father who was very severely beaten and abused by his own father. So the karmic line was pretty dark and thick in certain ways. And I think my own father's way of trying to transform that karma was getting out of where he came from in one way, and also learning to be a marriage and family therapist. And he had I could tell for him the human condition and what we go through as part of just arriving here and trying to make our way was very important to him. And I have two half brothers and myself, and it's like each of us in our own way took a piece of that karma to try to work with. My oldest brother really ended up being the most like him in a certain way by swearing that he was never going to be like him. Surefire way to end up like a parent is, as it consumed him in a certain way. And my middle brother came to carry a lot of the substance abuse issues and came to he was a bartender for a while, which was his own way of being a therapist, I suppose. But he's come to carry a pretty thick line of that karma too, that he's still working out. And I don't know, for myself, there are a lot of ways that seal pressed on me as a kid. I would go with my dad to teach his anger management classes and theft classes and all sorts of things, and hang out with his patients when I was a kid because he worked a lot. And that entry into the human condition, what it means to struggle as a person, made a very strong impact on me as a kid. But I wasn't so much up for the DSM or the pathological side of that. That was my way of, I don't know, seeing how it served, but also how it stood in the way sometimes of something more. And so I kept digging deeper into my own path and finding other guiding forces that would take me in different places, which I think is part of what we do. And in a sense, I guess, say a couple more things and then I want to sit for a little while. We all come to hold these archetypal roles for each other throughout our lives. We're mothers and we're fathers and we're children and we're nemesis and we're siblings and we're tricksters and there's both an incredible generosity and responsibility oftentimes and difficulty and all sorts of things that come with holding those roles. And in a way, we all have all of them in us. We seem to have encounters this time around with particular ones that seem important, of which father may be or not be one for you. But in a sense, we're coming to know every part of the universe and be shaped by every part of the universe as we make ourselves whole. And so I'm going to read you just a couple poems really about inheritance, some of the things that we receive. These ones are about fathers, but the ways in which we're shaped. This one's called The Gift by Lee Young Lee. To pull the metal splinter from my palm, my father recited a story in a low voice. I watched his lovely face and not the blade. Before the story ended, he'd remove the iron sliver I thought I'd die from. I can't remember the tale, but hear his voice still, a well of dark water, a prayer. And I recall his hands, 2 measures of tenderness he laid against my face, the flames of discipline he raised above my head. Had you entered that afternoon, you would have thought you saw a man planting something in a boy's palm, a silver tear, a tiny flame. Had you followed that boy, you would have arrived here, where I bent over my wife's right hand. Look how I shaved her thumbnail down so carefully she feels no pain. Watch as I lift the splinter out. I was 7 when my father took my hand like this, and I did not hold that shard between my fingers and think, metal that will bury me, or christen it little assassin, or going deep for my heart. And I did not lift up my wound and cry, death visited here. I did what a child does when he's given something to keep. I kissed my father. Here's one called Digging by Seamus Heaney. This is one of those ways in which the seal is both there and gone, becomes something else. You become something else. Heaney says, between my finger and thumb, a squat pen rests, snug as a gun. Under my window, a clean rasping sound when the spade sinks into gravelly ground. My father digging. I look down till his straining rump among the flower beds bends low, comes up 20 years away, stooping in rhythm through potato drills where he was digging. The coarse boot nestled on the lug, the shaft against the inside knee was levered firmly. He rooted out tall tops, buried the bright edge deep to scatter new potatoes that we picked, loving their cool hardness in our hands. By God, the old man could handle a spade, just like his old man. My grandfather cut more turf in a day than any other man on Toner's bog. Once I carried him milk in a bottle corked sloppily with paper. He straightened up to drink it, then fell to right away, nicking and slicing neatly, heaving sods over his shoulder, going down and down for the good turf, digging. The cold smell of potato mold, the squelch and slap of soggy peat, the curt cuds of an edge through living roots awaken in my head. But I've no spade to follow men like them. Between my finger and thumb the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it. So we come to carry whatever we're given in our way. Heaney knew he'd have no chance with a real spade, but he had some way with a pen that was given to him. This is a short one by Su Tung Po called On the Birth of a Son. Families, when a child is born, hope it will turn out intelligent. I, through intelligence, have wrecked my whole life. Only hope that the baby will prove ignorant and stupid, Then he'll be happy all his days and grow into a cabinet minister. Let me give you one more, and maybe a couple after. This is by Sharon Olds. And in a way, what she's speaking of is how, as we claim our own journey, as we make our life our own, we feel that seal and the lifting of the seal. And we come to see our parents and whatever guiding forces we've had as human. And not in that, I don't know, they're only human, I forgive them sort of way, but genuinely, deeply as a person like any other person. This is called Late Poem to My Father. Suddenly I thought of you as a child in that house. The unlit rooms and the hot fireplace with the man in front of it, silent. You moved through the heavy air in your physical beauty, a boy of 7, helpless, smart. There were things the man did near you, and he was your father, the mold by which you were made. Down in the cellar, the barrels of sweet apples, picked at their peak from the tree, rotted and rotted, and past the cellar door the creek ran and ran, and something was not given to you, or something was taken from you that you were born with, so that even at 30 or 40, you set the oily medicine to your lips every night, the poison to help you drop down unconscious. I always thought the point was what you did to us as a grown man. But then I remembered that child being formed in front of the fire, the tiny bones inside his soul twisted in green stick fractures, the small tendons that hold the heart in place. And what they did to you, you did not do to me. When I love you now, I like to think I am giving my love directly to that boy in the fiery room, as if it could reach him in time. And I think this is part of really making any quest our own, is that at some point we realize all the things we're shaped by, both beauty and difficulty. And we somehow realize that's not a mistake, whatever it was. And that we do the very best we can to get free within exactly whatever we were given. And this practice has a profound generosity in that. It's held the space for that for countless generations. I'm going to tell you just a couple little tales from how our lineage made it to these shores. Because I feel so many ancestors that profoundly shaped our lives we know so little about, which is kind of an amazing thing about the tapestry of the world. All the ways we're held and all the battles that were fought and all the wisdom that was offered that we only know a tiny whisper of every so often. And first, and Soa Nakagawa is one of our more. John has pretty wild ancestors, but he's definitely on the wild uncle side of things. You look him up, you can just see by his face, but he was a very dedicated but very wily monk, and refused to eat any of the regular food of the other monks and refused to really do anything other than he was incredibly dedicated. And his teacher for a time was what John would call a very heavyweight person, Genpo Yamamoto, who was heavyweight in the sense that he actually was the person who convinced the Japanese emperor to surrender in World War II, because it was very clear to him that they had lost and that they needed to devote themselves to the task of facing the real reality that they were in, that they needed to rebuild. And so Genpo was not the most charismatic of people, but if you look at him, if you see a picture of him, you can tell he was kind of like a moving mountain of a man. And he had a great fondness for Soen. And Soen was sort of, I don't know, like a little wild meerkat or something. He would collect apple cores and banana peels to eat later rather than eat with the monks, because he refused to eat any cooked food. And he just generally was kind of a wild person. And eventually all the monks sort of ganged up and said, this guy, like, he needs to behave, do something, and we need to send him somewhere else. And Genpo said there is no other Roshi anywhere in Japan that could deal with someone like Soen. And this, to me, is the mark of the real gift of a guide, and what the father archetype holds is that it can see clearly your true nature, what you need, and what it can hurt sometimes. There was a story about Genpo. It was very hard to get trains after World War II, and he and Soen were trying to travel, and you'd have to wait for days sometimes, and people would rush the trains, and it was a very chaotic, difficult time. And somehow they made it onto one of the trains, and Genpo shoved his big body into a tiny place to sit for the long ride. And Soen, high on practice, took a full lotus position in the middle of the train ride, and everyone was sort of oohing and awing at him. And Genpo took him aside later and said, absolutely not. That was completely inappropriate. And the way that to be a bodhisattva is not to make a parade of yourself, but to disappear. And Soen was immediately embarrassed and sort of left, but eventually came back and apologized and said, you're right. And I feel like this is the mind seal that we get offered in a real teacher and guiding figure, is that they'll tell us things we absolutely may be embarrassed about and do not want to hear and will fight, but somehow realize are in service of our awakening. And the last thing I want to say about that is just that the way that things move through the dream of reality, how nothing belongs to one person. Somehow we become part of a lineage of dreams and imagination and ideas. And I put this on talk yesterday, but I just have to share it with you in case you don't see it, because Soen was very enchanted by this idea of an international interspiritual zendo, which back in the 30s was kind of a pipe dream. And he loved America because we thought that his antics were brilliant and enlightened and interesting, and the Japanese thought that he was completely out of line most of the time. And so he thought, I'm going to America, or at least he did for a good long while. But he wrote a letter to Win Senzaki, who was another one of along with D.T. Suzuki, helped establish the Dharma in the West, but in a much less flamboyant way. And he decides to make a day called Spiritual Interrelationship Day. And this is what he says. And I thought, this is what we're doing. Almost a century later, those who are interested in seeking the Dharma wherever they reside on this planet Start Zazen at 8 p.m. local time. Just like, this is what we're doing. Enter into Samadhi. Listen to the spiritual broadcasting and the offering of the shakuhachi flute. And I thought, good, we're right on track. We're living Soen's dream. Then we chant. After that, at each place have a joyous gathering. Is this not a universal bodhisattva occasion? What a joyous event. The spiritual interrelationship garden has no specific place. Rather, the entire cosmos is the garden. The members of the Dai Bosatsu group are all animate and inanimate beings. If some animate being really wants to join, he can become a member instantly, all by himself. If 5 or 6 people want to join, that is also fine. And this vision carried him into bringing the Dharma here. It carried him into part of why we, Pacific Zen, have the koan lineage. It carried him, and somehow it is carrying us at 10:30 a.m. Pacific time every Sunday, every morning in the open temple. So I think that's probably plenty from me, but I wonder, Todd, you have anything you'd like to say today?
I'm not sure. Let's see. I think what I was, as we were sitting, I was struck by the Iron Ox koan, and this, I think, a way that I hadn't settled into me before, in a sort of response to another koan that I quite like. What's the teaching that lasts a lifetime? Say something in response. And I just was feeling sort of the difference, a difference between those two, at least the way that I had sort of been sitting with them. And the first one was kind of the say something in response koan was one that I've liked quite a bit, and it kind of goes with my nature of having a task to do, right, which is to find the thing to say, the right thing to say, and the right time, and that's just something I just kind of naturally want to do, those kinds of things, and they're not necessarily in some ways it's almost defeating the purpose of that. It's the response part, and in every moment is new, so it's not something you can like necessarily set out to tackle. But what I felt in this sitting and with this koan was letting something change you, which has a very different feel. The first is being sort of forceful and projecting something into the world, and the second is being open to just what happens, and to maybe just hold open the idea that we don't have to know what we're going to change into, and we don't have to have an idea about whether or not the thing that you change into is better or worse than the way you were before. So that was nice. It felt freeing and a little scary, because I think for me, I always want to have some sense that my mind just wants to have some sense that whatever endeavor I am undertaking has some value, and by some definition of value, which who knows what that is, but just this idea that even the mind seal being transmitted from generation to generation has this capacity to impact you, and that it's completely unpredictable and free. That felt nice. So nice way to be entering into retreat. So I'm hoping to see many of you there next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. I think it's interesting. I feel like it's well said. I feel like part of what a teacher holds is that it's a worthwhile thing, whatever this is. That's part of what we glimpse in a teacher that grabs us is, oh, there's something here for me. And it is scary because I don't know what it will do to me, and I have to let go of something eventually. And it's usually the teacher who is the very person who says, you're going to have to let that go now. But we catch enough of a glimpse that we think, all right, let's see. Lonnie, wonder if you have anything you'd like to say.
Hi, everybody. Just feeling tremendous gratitude, and I really love this last teaching Tess about so on, and the sense of the fatherhood that we have going back so many generations in this practice. I'm just terribly grateful for it, and I guess that's really it right now. I'm sort of overwhelmed with gratitude that John is better and that we are all together in this. Thank you.
Thanks, Lonnie. Christina, you have anything you'd like to say?
I think mostly I'd like to just thank you, Tess, for teaching today, going into session and taking the time to sort of hold us all while we're kind of all feeling what John is going through. And yeah, I really loved listening today to the stories, and both hearing your family history, the way, this thing coming down from the father and breaking off into each of you in its own way, so sort of carrying the same seal, but it dispersing in all these different ways. And it also made me think of, there's a drawing by the artist William Kentridge, where he starts it himself, and he kind of thinks of himself backwards, I guess. And he draws this diagram, and very quickly he goes from himself to his parents to the generations, but it very quickly becomes an indescribable number. And it's a V when he draws it with a series of lines. And just as you were talking about the ancestors, about your own history, the kind of moving backwards and forwards from self back to the multitudes, and the multitudes down to the self, just, I don't know, gives a kind of breath to one's individual existence that I really appreciate. Yeah, so thank you.
That's great. Thanks. You remind me of a funny conversation I had with John once, because it used to be that part of entering the tradition really was you would draw the ancestral map of all the teachers. I remember asking him about it because someone was talking to me, and he said, I don't know, seems a little literal to me. He said, what about the grizzly bears or the trees or all the things that are somehow contributing in a lineage to our awakening? And what you said sort of reminds me of that. Jan Brogan, our head of practice to be for the week to come. You have anything you want to say?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, the thing you said about the seal, it's not here, just felt like it's here, everywhere, but tattooed throughout my body at this point. And a wonderful thing this morning when people were coming on, the con for next week has this tapestry of brocade, and that's what it's felt like with people coming in on the screen, and that flow, that beautiful indigo blue flow that feels so deep already for me. So thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Thank you for being here today, everyone. I know it means a lot to John. It means a lot to me to be here with you. And thank you, Michael, for carrying on our enlightening flute and cosmos of the music. Thanks, everyone.